Ever wonder what Batman would be like if he had magical powers and was even more unhinged than he already was? Well, the Eminence in Shadow might just be the anime for you. Yeah, this anime may just hold the title of Isekai of the Year. In a genre that admittedly has gotten a bit stale, the Eminence in Shadow is a surprisingly fun show. But what makes it so special? The story of Eminence in Shadow follows a boy named Sid Kagenou, or as he was known before reincarnation, Minoru Kagenou. Before getting hit by the obligatory isekai truck, he was a high school student who dreamed of being a cool, shadowy hero. Before reincarnation, this meant he basically became the Punisher. He went around beating criminals with crowbars. But like I said at the start, Sid's a lot more deranged than someone like Batman or the Punisher. Sid was always frustrated by his own limits and knew a simple kid like him couldn't take on a professionally trained army. And in particular, Sid was obsessed with the idea of being stronger than a nuclear bomb. In fact, what led Sid to dying was a crazed training session in the woods where he tried to give himself magic powers. But now that he's in this fantasy world, Sid can finally wield the power he's wanted for so long. Seeing Sid's life before he got reincarnated was interesting. Most isekai anime only have a brief scene of it at the beginning. Some don't even bother showing the hero's previous life at all. But here, the entire first episode is dedicated to Sid's past life. The manga and light novels didn't show us Sid's life until much later, but we think the anime starting with this is a really good choice. It gives us an interesting look into Sid's head, seeing just what makes him tick. Now that Sid's in a fantasy world, he finally has the immense power to back up his dreams of being a shadowy hero. But even then, Sid still feels the need to hide his identity. He just wants to blend into the background as Sid Kagenou and hide the fact that he's really a mysterious stranger. To keep up the superhero metaphors, it's kinda like Superman and Clark Kent. The main difference is, Sid seems to enjoy fooling people way too much. He puts a surprising amount of effort into looking like an average nobody. Like in one episode where he intentionally keeps getting beat up during a fencing tournament. It's honestly pretty funny to watch Sid try so hard to look like a nobody. He really just ends up calling more attention to himself. Of course, even in his shadow persona, Sid isn't always as cool as he thinks he is. Sid is kind of a chunibyo. At the start of the series, Sid is under the impression that all of his adventures are just an elaborate game of pretend and his gang of elf girls are all in on the act. But in a massive coincidence, the name of a secret organization that Sid made up on a whim, the Cult of Diablos, is a real evil organization with plans just like Sid had described. The manga especially likes to emphasize the comedy that comes from Sid's weird behavior. It's toned down in the anime, but it's still there. The sense of humor in the series is fun, but it can also be a bit immature. It has a villain whose name is, no joke, Perv Asshat. We can't make this stuff up. But back to Sid for a moment. Despite being weirdly oblivious, Sid is still a pretty cool character. He's got access to some pretty overpowered abilities, and his constantly calm demeanor tends to throw off his enemies. Oh, and remember how we said Sid wanted to survive a nuke? Well, now he can do just that. One of Sid's signature powers is being able to summon what's essentially a magical nuke. The first time he uses her, he basically levels several city blocks and survives. It's really fun to watch overpowered heroes kill irredeemably evil villains. So we get a lot of crazy action with Sid. Another thing we think is interesting about this universe is its setting. A lot of isekai goes for a short, generic, medieval setting, but the Eminence in Shadow sets it apart and goes for a setting that's more based on Victorian England with stuff like trains having been invented. That said, some parts of the setting do feel a bit lazy at times, mainly when it comes to the academy that Sid attends. A lot of the scenes just look like they're set in present-day school. Seriously, a lot of the school backdrops feel like they'd be at home in a modern high school anime. But other than that, we actually do enjoy the Victorian-inspired setting, especially the sequences set within the city. The reveal of the city at the end of the episode 1 was honestly breathtaking, and shows us another great benefit of giving us a whole episode in the modern world. The switch from modern day to Victorian fantasy is sudden, and makes the world feel all the more fantastical. Now, as fun as the series is, we do have to admit that the supporting cast is a bit on the weaker side. Don't get us wrong, Sid is a fun character, but his group of elf and catgirl sidekicks are not particularly fleshed out. They feel pretty interchangeable, and the only one we're able to consistently recognize was Alpha, mostly because she was the first one we met. They all kinda act like they were just created for the sake of marketing. But with that said, the rest of the supporting cast does a better job. You've got comic relief characters like Sid's friends, Skell and Poe, who are completely oblivious to his double life. Going back to the Superman comparisons, they're the Jimmy Olsen to his Clark Kent. And Sid also seems to have several Lois Lanes in his life. The first of Sid's love interests we meet is Alexia. He actually ends up dating her by accident. As part of his background character act, he tries asking her on a date in what he thinks is the weakest way possible, only for her to accept just to annoy her fiance. Then there are other girls who seem interested in Sid, such as the shy bookworm Sherry, or the talented swordswoman Rose. Plus, we've also got a large cast of villains. After all, no good hero is complete without a rogues gallery. A lot of them are pretty one-note and just evil, but in a series like this, that's really all you need. Seeing someone hateable enough for it to be satisfying when their inevitable karmic death comes. But some of them have a bit more to them, like the first true villain we meet, Viscount Grease. His main motivation is to help his daughter who had been kidnapped and had a curse placed upon her that mutated her into a strange monster. Of course, Sid, in his typical fashion, is completely oblivious to Grease's motivations and is just annoyed at him for kidnapping his sister. As for the plot, The Eminence in Shadow is currently airing as we write this, so for the sake of you viewers, we're trying to avoid any major spoilers. But from the very start, it does feel like it's building to be something bigger. Like we said, despite Sid being super powerful, he is also kinda clueless. In fact, him discovering Viscount Grease's lair in episode 2 was the result of him randomly throwing a knife at a map. As we've said already, Sid just thinks of the cult of Diablos as something he made up, but there is really a crazy conspiracy involving ancient artifacts and the blood of royals. Sid's occasional oblivious can be fun. A lot of isekai protagonists are effortlessly cool, and while Sid can be like that, it's fun to occasionally see past his facade of coolness. Overall, we really like The Eminence in Shadow. The isekai genre is admittedly a bit oversaturated. Dozens of isekai anime come out every year, but not all of them are winners. Only a few are able to stand the test of time. And while this anime may not reinvent the wheel or anything, The Eminence in Shadow is a surprisingly fun time. Sid's a fun main character with both awesome and ridiculous moments. Plus, it does just enough to stand out from the crowd while still also being a crowd pleaser with its amazing action scenes. Even if isekai isn't typically your thing, we still recommend giving it a shot. It may not have the emotional character drama of Re:Zero or the non-stop jokes of Konosuba, but The Eminence in Shadow is still entertaining in a lot of ways. It may even deserve a chance at a second season.